In last week's episode, we talked about mourning online and specifically mourning celebrities online. Let's see what you had to say. So in this comment response, we're just gonna, I think, respond to two really big ideas that came up in a bunch of conversations I saw surrounding this video. And we're not gonna respond to a lot of specific comments, but before we do that, I wanna reiterate something that we sort of mentioned, but moved quickly through in the video itself. So I think what's worth restating is that mourning and grief are deeply personal processes. They have a lot to do with who we are, how we think we fit into the world, and how we see ourselves relating to other people. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be private, that the personal and the private are not necessarily the same thing. And that's such a hard distinction, especially in the grieving process, to separate what you think you need from all of the things that are expected of you. I think a lot of times there is this impulse to let other people's expectations guide our actions in things like this that are socially so laden with meaning and heavy with expectation. You know, we are, by our nature, very, very social beings, and it's hard to have something, especially something like this, that is truly yours, and to figure out what it is that's good for you, regardless of all of the different directions that you are being pulled. And so I just want to say that for everybody who has gone through stuff like this, who is going through stuff like this, who will continue to go through it, I mean, I can't expect to understand it perfectly. I can't expect to know what it is exactly that you're dealing with, but I think one of the big things that we're trying to say, or that I'm trying to say, is that there is somewhere a community of people who could help if you feel like that is a thing that would be helpful. And that's really what I think is at the heart of a lot of the last week's episode, that if people is something that you feel like you need as part of this process, then there is no excuse for people telling you that it shouldn't be or can't be. So yeah, I thought that was something that was worth restating, maybe making doubly explicit. So moving on to comments, Brandon O'Brien on Twitter said something that actually made two comments that I think are worth addressing. The first is regarding how it is sometimes hard to give the death of a celebrity full emotional attention when there are other seemingly much larger and arguably more important events taking place in the world. And I think this is something where maybe a beloved celebrity has died, but at the same time there is still war, there is still violence, there are still large problems looming in the world, and I can absolutely understand this point of view. And I think really what this gets down to is two things: that when we look at the news, or when we look at the cable news especially, and they break coverage of something like the war in Syria to talk about the death of a celebrity, it does feel like you're choosing. It can feel like we are choosing one thing over another thing because of the way television and time slots and broadcasts works. You can only show one thing at a time, and they're always going to go with the thing that they think is going to result in the larger ratings. When in fact, you can have, and we talked about this a little bit in the episode, you can have all of these feelings at once. You can feel bad about the simultaneous plight of a whole population of people in a war-torn part of the world, and still feel bad in yourself and for the fans and family of a deceased celebrity or creative hero or statesman or entrepreneur. I think a lot of times it's easy to feel like the media is guiding us in our feelings, that by showing coverage of certain things, it's telling us what we can and should be putting into the forefront of our minds. And I think it's important in a lot of ways to resist that and to recognize that our brains and emotions don't work like time slots or broadcast channels, that our emotions aren't necessarily competing, and that we can have many, oftentimes conflicting ideas or reactions to a whole huge set of things. The second thing that Brandon brought up that I saw being brought up in a lot of places and that I've seen brought up in many places is how it is we mourn for celebrities with complicated and possibly criminal pasts. Mourning in general is a very complicated process. I think that might go without saying. But I think because of how complicated it is, we often want it to be simple. We search for ways to simplify it. One of the ways that I think we simplify it is we respond to these norms that allow us to request or demand or give us permission to pack it in and to not show anything or to insist that it is in fact private. And I think another way that we try to simplify the very complicated process of mourning, and I say this as someone who has mourned, but also as someone who, I don't have a psychology degree, so I'm an armchair many things. So, if there is someone who has expertise in this, I would love to hear what you think. But I think another way that we try to simplify this is to try to mourn people as simply as we possibly can. I think that in death, we want people to be a simple thing. We want people to be one thing so that we can mourn that thing, and we want that to be a positive thing. And I think as an extension of that, when we think of public mourning, if we do think of it at all, I think we tend to think of it as a simple celebration of the person and their accomplishments, especially if that person is a celebrity. And I think that insofar as this is a thing that people do, it is in fact a misstep. I think that it's really important for both our family members and acquaintances and friends and celebrities and heroes to mourn the whole person, which is it's incredibly difficult. And I think that it's hard, and I think that a lot of times we don't do it, and I, in the past, have not done it because of how difficult it is, but I think that it's important to think about what people are and what their legacy is and what they've left behind on the occasion of their death. I think mourning is very much a cocktail of grief and disappointment and confusion and anger and appreciation, and I think denying that and trying to push some of those things off to the side and to simplify the process, and then in the process of simplifying the process, simplifying the person is another one of those things that sort of seems to fundamentally deny the truth of both people and the way that we can feel about them. So when it comes to mourning a celebrity or even a family member who may have a complicated past, I think that really this is weirdly related to the question of whether or not it's okay to have problematic faves. Can you like things or people that are in some way problematic, which is a loaded term and one that I don't necessarily like, but someone who has complicated politics or has done something questionable in the past. And I think that the way to do that is to not apologize for it, to accept it, to weigh the balance that you have to make in order to enjoy that thing, and ask what about yourself is then reflected in your willingness or ability to continue to enjoy the problematic fave or the thing that has that complicated past. I think that it gets to this idea of whole people, that it means something, and I think it means something important, that you can or may want to look past someone's actions or someone's politics or someone's beliefs or a subtext of something in order to continue interfacing with their work or their personality or their legacy in another way. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing as long as we can be honest about it and we can approach the whole of the thing. Brandon and I on Twitter talked briefly about Bill Cosby, and I think that one way to look at this is, can we say that we have already mourned Bill Cosby in some way, that his legacy has already left us, and in the future when he does actually pass away, will we have expended all of that energy? Will we not be willing or able to mourn twice? And I think that a very fair answer to that question is no, we will not have the energy to mourn twice. So for the record, I feel like this is maybe a strange thing to put on the record, but I'm not a fan of dancing on people's graves. I don't think that the expression of joy over someone's death is necessarily a responsible or necessary reaction. I do think, as I said, that someone's death is a opportunity to confront and talk about their legacy, especially if they are one of those people, as we talked about in the episode, that had a huge impact on the world, that they were someone who affected a huge number of people. So, for example, is Nancy Reagan's death a time to celebrate? No, absolutely not. Is Nancy Reagan's death a time to talk about how far we have come in the recognition of people who are living with AIDS and the support that we're able to give them? Yes, I think it absolutely is. That part of history is very much a part of her legacy and was a huge factor in the effect that she had on a massive number of people. And again, I think to deny that is to deny the person and the effect they had on the world and other humans and the complicated process of grieving for them. I understand that, and I fully understand that even thoughtful critique after someone's death is a controversial line to walk, and that there is a respect that should be paid, and there is timing to be considered, and there is tone to be considered, and I think it is not something that I would ever involve myself in. I think it is a very delicate situation, but to say that people shouldn't, period, I think is, I don't know what the word is. Troubling is the one that comes right to mind, but it's not right. It seems to deny people the opportunity to do that at all just seems wrong to me, and maybe I'm alone on this. I think insofar as mourning gives us the opportunity to confront the meaning and legacy of a whole person, their place in history, both personal and global, if that happens to be the case, and the effect that they had on certain groups of people, that it's important and maybe even something of a responsibility to do that, both honestly and earnestly. But, as the theme that seems to be developing both in last week's video and then in this comment response, where, we're sort of dealing with the complicated ramifications of that idea, it doesn't mean that any of those things are easy or simple, which I think, it gets back to this point of we want to simplify these things, but it is maybe that they are not simple. And so what does that mean? Unfortunately, I don't have any easy answers, so I hope this was at least a somewhat helpful comment response. We'll see you next week.